This is not a shelter for your kind. Go cause drama somewhere else. That's what Officer Brent Halvorson said, before dumping a bottle of cold water onto the head of a black woman who hadn't said a single harsh word. No threat, no crime, just a quiet voice asking for help. But here's what he didn't know. The woman standing in front of him, soaked, silent, and staring straight into his soul, was Chief Danica R. Ellison, his new boss. So let me ask you this. What if she had been your mother, your sister? And what if no camera had been rolling? Drop a comment and tell us which state you're watching from. Welcome to Mr. 7 Stories. If this is your first time here, hit like, subscribe, and follow for more stories that hold power to account. Let's get into today's story. Tuesday afternoon. The clock struck 2:07 p.m. June heat pierced through the dusty glass windows of Eastvale Station, one of the oldest precincts in Wexley Borough. The air was thick with the stench of scorched coffee, mildewed paperwork, and expired disinfectant. The lobby sat still, as if time itself had stopped. Only the ticking of an old wall clock and the weak hum of a broken air conditioner, nudging faded paint on the wall. Then, thud, a plastic water bottle rolled across the yellow tile floor, tapping the leg of a molded plastic chair. Next to it stood a black woman around 40, baseball cap soaked, gray t-shirt dark with sweat, faded jeans worn at the knees, and a pair of scuffed New Balance sneakers. She said nothing. Water dripped from her head, trickling down her neck, soaking the back of her shirt, pooling into a quiet, cold halo around her feet. No shouting, no outburst, just a breath, short and ragged, a mix of shock and fury so tightly clenched it hurt. I told you to get the hell out. The voice cracked like a whip in the empty lobby. Officer Brent Halvorson, desk sergeant, white, 44, face red like fired brick, eyes squinted in thinly veiled hatred. He was still holding the empty bottle, evidence of what he'd just done, as if he'd acted out of duty. This is the Wexley Police Department, not a garbage dump for people like you to stir up trouble. Get out before I really lose it. His voice spat contempt and pride. None of the 5 residents seated along the blue chairs dared say a word. They just stared. A young officer in the corner, who would later be identified as Kyle Bledsoe, clutched a stack of files, frozen. He saw it all, from a moment of dismissal to the sickening splash of that bottle. But his feet seemed nailed to the floor. The woman slowly raised her head. Her hat brim, drenched, hung heavy over her face. But beneath that soaked veil, her eyes were sharp, cold, not the flash of sudden rage, but the gaze of someone who'd seen too much and was memorizing everything. Her eyes locked on Halvorson, unblinking. People like me, huh? She repeated his words, each syllable slicing through the heavy air like wire. Her voice was low, clear, unshaken. No one knew who she was, but everyone felt it. Something serious had just begun, and in that small lobby of Eastvale Station, where slow afternoons and quiet prejudice used to slip unnoticed between shifts, a moral earthquake was forming. No one guessed that the woman soaking wet on that tile floor was about to bring down a system. But no one in that room would forget the moment, just like they'd never forget the sound of that bottle. Thud, a tiny sound, but one that struck straight at the city's conscience. The air inside Eastvale Station hung heavy as lead. Everyone looked, but no one spoke. All that remained was the sound of water dripping from her soaked hair, each drop landing on the tile with a sharp, chilling echo. The woman, Tanya Brooks, as she had introduced herself at 1:57 p.m., still stood there, unmoving, unshaken, but under that soaked gray t-shirt, she was no ordinary citizen enduring humiliation. She was Danica R. Ellison, age 41, the newly appointed chief of police of Wexley Borough. Less than 7 days ago, she stood inside the main hall of Wexley Municipal Enforcement HQ, raising her right hand in oath, before the mayor, the city council, and dozens of reporters. It was a formal moment, filled with flashbulbs, promises, and public hope. No one expected the new police chief to begin her term dressed as a civilian, walking straight into a place where numbers on reports never told the full story. She didn't choose the safe route. She chose to start at the bottom. She knew Eastvale Station was a pressure point, a precinct with more than 10 formal complaints in the past 2 years for rudeness, racial bias, and abuse of power. But those cases were always folded up, filed away with the same tired excuse: insufficient evidence. Danica knew if she wanted to change the culture, she couldn't do it from a desk, not through memos, not over polite meetings with tea. She had to feel it with her own eyes, her own skin. And this morning, when she slid open the closet in her small rented apartment near Glenwood Heights, she already knew she wouldn't walk out with a badge or title. She'd walk in with deliberate invisibility: a plain gray t-shirt, a frayed baseball cap, faded jeans, and a quiet voice that said, "My name is Tanya Brooks." The story she crafted was simple, realistic, just like the thousands of citizens who had walked into police stations before her. A neighbor was threatening her. She needed help filing for an emergency order. She just wanted someone to listen. No robbery, no blood, just the kind of thing this profession was supposed to take seriously. She wanted to see how would they respond to a regular black woman asking for help. Now she knew that water bottle, it didn't physically hurt, but it did exactly what it needed to. It proved that the rot in the system wasn't some rumor. It was here, alive, thriving, and being served up to the public in the name of law and order. And standing before her, still clutching the empty bottle, was Brent Halvorson, a man she'd read about in no fewer than 3 internal reports. Never once disciplined, now fully exposed, clueless that the soaking wet woman standing in front of him was his chief. Danica drew in a slow, deep breath. Her thick hair clung to her scalp, salt water on her lips, cold dripping down her spine. But her eyes held firm, because today wasn't a test. It was proof, the start of a cleansing Wexley Borough had never seen before. And it all began with a water bottle and a stare that did not blink. Danica stood tall, hair heavy with water, skin cold from the soaking, but her mind sharper than ever. She didn't say another word. She didn't need to, because the way Brent Halvorson panted, his eyes darting wildly, like he had just realized he'd dumped water on the police chief's head, said more than words ever could. But Danica wasn't there to teach one reckless officer a lesson. She came with a larger mission, something no spreadsheet from HQ had ever captured. On her first day at Wexley Municipal Enforcement HQ, Danica did something that rattled every lieutenant in the room. She ignored the entire executive report that the admin team had neatly bound for her. Data is one thing, she said during her opening meeting, but culture doesn't show up in a pie chart. I'm not here to look at numbers. I'm here to look at people. Veteran officers exchanged glances. Some nodded politely. Others, especially those whose names had appeared in past complaints, swallowed hard. Danica knew full well, you don't change police culture with paper resolutions. She had learned that firsthand during the reform project in Camden Ridge, a town where, before she arrived, residents feared the police more than they feared actual criminals. She had seen it with her own eyes. An elderly brown-skinned man turned away when trying to file a stolen vehicle report because he looked homeless. A little Mexican girl interrogated by an officer for mispronouncing the word license. Small moments, ignored, dismissed, but together, they formed the bricks in a wall of distrust between the community and those sworn to protect it. Danica couldn't let that wall rise again. In Wexley Borough, not under her watch. So she didn't reform from the top down. Like every chief before her, she started from the bottom, from the sidewalks up. She rented a modest apartment in Glenwood Heights, where her neighbors were delivery drivers, cleaning staff, and retirees. She made small talk at local diners, stood in gas station lines like any other resident. No badge, no government SUV. Some nights, she sat on her front steps for hours, just listening to barking dogs, loud music, 2 neighbors arguing over the fence. Not to intervene, but to understand how people lived and what they endured. And every morning, when she walked into a precinct, in the guise of Tanya Brooks, paper in hand, a hint of confusion in her eyes. She wasn't just checking protocol. She was taking the moral pulse of the entire system. At Eastvale Station, she hadn't chosen Halvorsen by accident. His name had appeared in no fewer than 5 internal complaints. The same phrases, repeated again and again. Rude, impatient, difficult with Latino and Black residents. But like always, no hard evidence. No witnesses willing to testify. No one brave enough to call it out. Today, that changed, and the person willing to stand behind her name was the one they couldn't dismiss, couldn't silence. The police chief herself. Deep down, Danica felt no satisfaction. She felt pain, not from the water, but from the cold confirmation that after all these decades, the invisible pain of everyday people was still treated like background noise. And if she didn't come to hear it for herself, to feel it, no one would ever truly know how much it hurt. The silence inside Eastvale Station was still thick, as if the whole room was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. And something had broken, not from the splash, but from a look in Danica R. Ellison's eyes. Still standing, still soaked, still steel. But she wasn't the only one who hadn't moved. Brent Halvorsen, the way he stood there, not noticing the bottle rolling from his hand, his squinting eyes now darting with nowhere to hide, was the exact portrait Danica had seen in a dozen internal reports. But no document had ever captured him this vividly. Brent Halvorsen, age 44, front desk sergeant, former patrol officer, District 4. He had once been big, muscular, known in the department for being blunt and tough. But a knee injury in 2015, from slipping while chasing a suspect over a fence, had ended his field career. He should have been retired early or transferred to a support unit handling paperwork. But due to staffing shortages, Brent was kept on, posted to the Eastvale front desk, where he faced daily the very people he'd long viewed as troublemakers. Over time, the man who'd once been a symbol of street cop grit became a living nightmare for anyone who walked through that station door. In the disciplinary records, Halvorsen's name appeared year after year for 6 straight years. 2017, accused of threatening a Palestinian woman who asked for help filing a protection order. This isn't your embassy. Go ask back in your own country. 2018, verbally insulted an elderly Vietnamese man, reporting a stolen item. I don't have time for some missing flip-flops. 2021, snapped at a 15-year-old boy, reporting school bullying. Trying to be funny, kid? Go back to your video games. Most complaints were marked handled internally, dismissed under recycled phrases. Job stress, cultural misunderstanding, no body cam evidence, no witnesses willing to speak. A few younger officers even quietly requested shift transfers, just to avoid working with him. Danica had read it all, but she needed to see it herself, and now she had, more clearly than she ever expected. Still, there was one thing she hadn't anticipated, a detail that surfaced only after the splash of cold water. As Halvorsen stumbled back, panicked from realizing Danica's true identity, his shirt, sloppily buttoned, shifted sideways, and from beneath the collar, a small metal badge slipped out, dangling on a thin silver chain. Danica glanced down, her eyes locked on the emblem. It was the symbol of the Fraternal Order of Guardians, a semi-official police fraternity, previously investigated for ties to an underground network of xenophobic, radical officers in the state. At first, she thought it was just some old trinket, but then she saw it, that flicker in Halvorsen's eyes. Fear, replaced by sharp, calculated alertness. In that moment, she knew this wasn't about one man's bad temper. It was about an entire hidden culture, a brotherhood held together by quiet wires, coded allegiances, and an unwritten oath no one dared speak aloud. Danica slowly crouched down, picked up the soaked badge from the tile floor, then looked up, her voice calm, deliberate. Do you wear this to remind yourself who you serve, or to remind yourself who you're against? Officer Halvorsen. No one answered, but everyone inside Eastvale Station knew something had just changed. Forever. That tiny fraternal Order of Guardians badge still glistened with droplets in Danica's hand. The dull silver caught the flicker of an old fluorescent light overhead. She didn't say another word. She simply placed it, quietly, on the edge of the front desk, right in front of Brent Halvorson, as if returning something she had no interest in keeping. He fumbled with his collar, hands trembling, eyes darting like someone just caught in the act. But instead of backing down like a man recognizing his mistake, Halvorson squared his shoulders, leaned forward slightly, as if trying to reclaim control. "All right," he growled, masking his panic. "You came here for some nonsense. A restraining order or whatever, right? I told you, that's not police business. You want legal action, go to Redstone County Courthouse." Danica didn't flinch. Her voice was calm, firm, and even. "You're the front desk officer. I have the right to report this incident, and I am here to file a complaint about harassment by a neighbor. Your personal opinion about whether it's nonsense does not remove your obligation." Halvorson let out a low, mocking laugh, the kind of laugh that came from men who thought they'd seen it all, who thought they knew how to handle trouble. "You deaf or just slow?" he barked, slamming his hand on the wooden counter, sending a few papers fluttering. "I don't write reports for made-up drama, especially not from people like you." Danica didn't get angry. She simply lowered her voice, steady, like reading into the record. "I'm requesting your full name and badge number. I have a legal right to know who is refusing my valid request." To someone like Brent Halvorson, those words landed like a punch to the chest. A black woman, dressed like any ordinary citizen, daring to demand his identification, talking about legal rights, in broad daylight, in front of witnesses? Halvorson's jaw locked tight. His cheeks flushed deep red. He growled, syllable by syllable. "You're disturbing the peace. You came in here to provoke police, and I'm not letting this go." Danica held his gaze, did not blink. "I'm exercising my legal rights as a citizen," she said, "and if you refuse to perform your duty, I'm requesting to speak with your shift supervisor." And at that moment, the last thread of Halvorson's self-control snapped. He shoved his chair back, stood up abruptly, and swung open the side gate of the reception desk, the one meant only for officers changing shifts. The door screeched on its hinges. Everyone in the lobby jolted. A little girl clutched her mother's hand tight. Halvorson stormed toward Danica, face to face, veins in his neck pulsing, still holding the half-full water bottle. "You want a supervisor? You want to file a complaint?" he hissed. Here's a complaint you'll never forget." Then, before anyone could stop him, he twisted the cap off and dumped the rest of the water straight onto Danica's head. Splash. The cold hit her scalp, her forehead, her neck. Hard. Her cap soaked through, clinging to her brow. Her shirt drenched, pressed tight to her skin. Like a punishment, shock cracked through the room. Like a lightning bolt. Silence. Complete. No one laughed. No one tried to defend it. All eyes in the room, from young Officer Kyle Bledsoe in the corner, to the elderly brown-skinned woman clutching her purse with trembling hands, shared the same expression. Horror. Danica didn't shout. She didn't fight back. But when she slowly raised her head, water dripping from her chin, her eyes were no longer those of an ordinary civilian. They were razor-sharp, and they were about to strip the mask off an entire system. Droplets still fell from her soaked hair, forming widening circles on the tiled floor. But the air inside Eastvale Station had turned even colder than the water poured over her. A silence so tense. You could hear the strain in every breath, every heartbeat. Brent Halvorson, the man who had just committed an act no officer with a shred of honor would ever do, stood frozen, a statue with a plastic bottle dangling like a live grenade in his hand. His face turned red, then pale, in the span of a few seconds. His breath uneven, his hands starting to tremble. Danica calmly raised a hand, brushing her thick hair away from her face. Then, unhurried, she placed both hands on the brim of her dripping baseball cap and slowly removed it. Time stopped, her hair tied neatly, her face refined but cold as steel. her eyes sharp as lasers. And as the people in the lobby began to realize, the woman who had just been doused with water wasn't just a neighbor filing a complaint. She was Chief Danica R. Ellison, the new police chief of Wexley Borough. Silence sliced the room clean in half. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a black leather badge wallet. Even wet, the silver emblem gleamed. Danica R. Ellison, she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but each word struck like a hammer on glass. Newly appointed police chief, Wexley Borough. Sworn in last Monday. Halvorson took a full step back. His lips parted, then closed, as if he wanted to say no way. But his tongue had gone numb. Danica stepped forward, her finger pointed directly at him. And now, her voice wasn't that of someone humiliated. It was the voice of authority, of command, and she knew it would be obeyed. Officer Brent Halvorson, badge number 428. Effective immediately. You are suspended from duty. Surrender your firearm, badge, radio, and any agency property to the supervising officer. Across the room, Officer Kyle Bledsoe, the youngest on site, still baby-faced but visibly shaken, instinctively straightened up. Bledsoe, Danica snapped, turning his way. Get the shift supervisor. Now, I want the entire incident documented. This officer is to be isolated from all witnesses until FIU, Federal Integrity Unit, arrives. Why, yes, Chief. Right away. Bledsoe stammered, then bolted down the hallway. Halvorson tried to compose himself. He stumbled back another step, but his knees buckled, like the final wave of panic had finally hit. Why you can't? I didn't know who you were, he stammered. Danica cut him off. No mercy in her voice. And what if I were someone else, she said. What if I really was Tanya Brooks? From Glenwood Heights, just here to ask for help. From someone wearing a badge and a gun. Her tone wasn't cold steel anymore. It was something deeper. The voice of a woman who had witnessed too many silences. From justice. She wouldn't get the chance to take off her hat and defend herself. She'd just walk out of here, humiliated, angry, and alone. And no one would know. No one would care. Suddenly, the back door swung open. A middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and a neatly pressed uniform hurried in. Sergeant Marcus Tillman. His eyes scanned the room quickly. Danica, soaked but standing tall. Halvorson nearly collapsed on the floor. The rest, frozen like statues. What the hell is going on here? He asked, his voice not yet steady. Danica turned toward him and handed over her badge. I'm the acting commander of this precinct for the moment, she said. And you just arrived, in time, to carry out orders. That day, at Eastvale Station, for the first time in years, a woman in a gray t-shirt exposed an entire system, not with slogans, but with truth. 20 minutes after Sergeant Marcus Tillman arrived and executed the official suspension of Brent Halvorson, the air inside Eastvale Station had shifted completely. No more idle laughter, no more lazy postures, from officers used to apathy. Now, there were hurried footsteps as a federal response team moved in. FIU, the Federal Integrity Unit, had arrived in less than an hour. 3 people. A white woman with silver hair and frameless glasses. Agent Marcia Deeds, one of the most seasoned investigators in the unit. An Asian American man, his laptop always open. Tech specialist Nam Sato. And a black man in his 50s. Voice deep, eyes sharp. Lead coordinator Clay Harmon. They didn't waste words. They only made requests. All security footage from the front lobby. 1:30 p.m. to now. List of witnesses present at the time of the incident. We'll need a secure, private room for internal personnel interviews. And then came the turning point. Inside a small conference room at Eastvale, under the watch of the FIU team, Danica Tillman, and a legal representative from the city. The video was played on a 19-inch monitor, footage from 4 different camera angles. Replayed everything in stark silence. Danica walking in, being ignored, Halvorson's dismissive glare, and finally, the assault, the water, the slurs, the power, abused in plain sight. But the most shocking part wasn't Halvorson's behavior. It was a small detail, one the Northeast security camera caught, by accident, just seconds before Danica took off her hat. Officer Kyle Bledsoe, standing near the records room in the back corner, stepped forward. He raised his hand. He was going to stop Halvorsen. But then, he turned his head. He hesitated. And then, he stepped back, stood still, like a statue. The conference room went silent. Sergeant Tillman turned to Danica. Danica didn't speak. She just stared at the screen. Not angry, not bitter, just disappointed. The questioning began immediately after. In a private room, Danica walked them through the events. From walking into the precinct as Tanya Brooks, to the moment Halvorsen poured water on her head. No drama, no embellishment, just facts, exactly as the camera saw them. Then came Halvorsen's turn. He changed out of uniform, now wearing civilian clothes provided by Tillman. He sat low in a metal chair, sweat soaking his collar. It was a lapse in judgment, he rasped. I didn't know she was the chief. I thought she was just who? Clay Harmon asked calmly. Someone unworthy of basic respect? Halvorsen didn't answer. His head dropped, and he didn't raise it again. Not once during the entire 53-minute interview. Civilian witnesses were also brought in one by one. Ms. Norma Lewis, age 68. Mr. Jameer Weston, 32. And Alani Rivera, a 10-year-old girl who had been with her mother. All three gave the same account. Halvorsen made degrading remarks, refused help, and dumped water on a woman who never provoked him. Agent Marcia Deeds jotted notes with sharp precision. All testimonies matched the video footage. No inconsistencies. Indisputable. That afternoon, Danica stepped out of the meeting room. In the hallway, Officer Kyle Bledsoe was waiting, leaning against the wall. Eyes red. "Chief," he stammered. "You saw it," Danica said softly. No anger. He nodded. "You have a choice," she continued. "Not to prove you're brave, but to choose. Stand back, or step forward. In the justice system, cameras may capture the truth, but choosing to stand with it always starts in the human heart. And that day in Eastvale, the truth didn't need to be dramatized. It didn't need defending. 1 week after the incident at Eastvale Station, the air at Wexley Municipal Enforcement HQ was still thick with tension. Outside, reporters camped under temporary tents, waiting for an official statement. Inside, closed-door meetings ran nonstop. Divisions deepened. Public opinion fractured. But inside the mind of Chief Danica R. Ellison, only one thing mattered: a real solution. With all the evidence, the video, eyewitness statements, and prior disciplinary records, firing Brent Halvorsen would have been simple, clean, an easy decision to defend, a way to clear the board. But Danica knew, if punishment is only about retribution, the system will never change. Instead, she wanted to create a new precedent, not just for Halvorsen, but for every officer watching in silence. She wanted to send a message. You can be exposed. You can be disciplined. But if you truly choose to change, this is your last chance. At the disciplinary hearing, after the board submitted their official recommendation, Danica stood and spoke. Clear, firm, unwavering. I don't want to expel Brent Halvorsen from the force. I want to put him in the light. Make him face himself. And if he breaks, no one will be able to blame the system ever again. The judgment was handed down. 1. 12-month suspension, without pay or benefits. 2. Mandatory enrollment in a new reform initiative, Project Resolve. Project Resolve, a newly launched collaboration between Wexley PD, the Federal Integrity Unit, FIU, and independent psychology organizations. It includes 180-plus hours of hands-on training, emotional regulation, de-escalation, civil rights law, anti-bias instruction, and ethical standards in policing. Weekly individual therapy, supervised by specialists from Novapath Institute, for a minimum of 18 months. 200 hours of community service, assigned to immigrant shelters, homeless outreach programs, and veteran centers for racial minorities. Assignments are non-negotiable. Ethics reevaluation every 3 months by a panel of 4. 1 FIU investigator, 1 licensed psychologist, one local community representative, and one HR officer from the Wexley PD. And finally, a strict requirement. If he fails to show at least 80% measurable attitude improvement within 2 years, he is permanently disqualified from serving in any public law enforcement role across the entire state of North Carolina. At the public press conference, Danica stood behind the wooden podium, eyes locked on the camera, her hair pulled back neatly, a black button-up shirt with no insignia, as if to say, "I speak for ethics, not for a badge. I don't believe in unconditional forgiveness," she said. "But I also don't believe removing one man is the only way to remove a problem. Brent Halvorson won't escape consequences, but he will have to live with them, learn from them, and if he's brave enough, he may become living proof that change is possible." The crowd was still. Then light applause, and among them, far back near the trees, Officer Kyle Bledsoe slowly nodded. Maybe the greatest change doesn't begin by taking down a bad man, but by forcing him to look in the mirror for a long time. Right after the press conference announcing Halvorson's sentence, a shockwave, like a silent tsunami, rippled through every corner of the Wexley Borough police system. No officer could ignore the story, not because of Halvorson's name, but because of how Chief Danica R. Ellison handled it. Head-on, cold, uncompromising. At East Vale Station, the break room chatter became louder than a coffee machine. From Clearhaven to Grants Hollow, every precinct was talking, over lukewarm coffee and half-eaten donuts. The name Danica spread, spoken in two very different tones. To the old guard, she was a disruption, but to the young, the quiet ones who used to freeze in the face of injustice, just like Kyle Bledsoe, they whispered, "This is the first time someone up top stood with us when the wrong came from within." They began to wonder, if she stood up for someone in disguise, would she stand up for me if I ever spoke out? On the other hand, the old guard, mostly veteran white officers, used to handling things internally, started whispering in encrypted group chats. "She's only been here 2 weeks and already filming people using a fake name, then dragging a fellow officer out in front of the public. Who knows which precinct she'll be prowling next, in a t-shirt and ball cap. Someone like that doesn't protect the badge. Someone like that betrays it." Some even called Danica's approach a dirty ambush, saying she set up a fellow officer right on home turf. The HR department recorded 2 internal transfer requests and 3 applications for extended leave within 3 days of the disciplinary ruling. One suburban union chair even posted a long blog entry accusing the new leadership of spreading paranoia, not reform. But there was one thing no one could deny. Since the Halvorson incident, not a single officer in Wexley Borough had raised their voice in the lobby again. No one slammed desks when questioned by a person of color, and no one looked at a woman in worn-out shoes and a frayed cap the same way again. Danica knew she was walking a tightrope. She had no illusions. That one incident would reform the whole machine. But she also understood something deeper. Fear spreads as fast as contempt. But trust, if planted the right way, takes root deeper than any punishment ever could. At a closed-door meeting with station captains, Danica stood beside a whiteboard, marker in hand, drawing a simple diagram. "We're here." She pointed to a circle in the middle. "We want to get here." She drew another circle further off. "We can't get there by walking the same road." Then she turned back to the room and said, "If you stay, I'll protect you. If you fight against this, there will be no compromise. But if you want real change, I'll walk beside you, every step." And in that moment, though a few lowered their eyes, a few gazes held her just a little longer than before. Not out of fear, but because, for the first time, some of them believed there might actually be another way. 3 months after the East Vale Station incident, on a breezy autumn afternoon, Danica R. Ellison stood alone on the 3rd floor of Wexley Municipal Enforcement HQ, looking down at the courtyard, where young officers were practicing emergency maneuvers. From up high, they looked like moving blue specks, orderly, focused, but carrying something new in their rhythm. Behind her, on a magnet-pinned bulletin board, hung the very first poster for Project Resolve. Brent Halvorson's face, without the badge, without the bravado, was shown as he served meals at a support center for African American veterans. Below the photo was a single caption: "Second chances aren't for the perfect. They're for those willing to look back." In the weeks that followed, Danica's story no longer lived only inside police hallways. It spread to reform summits, to ethics workshops at Wakefield University, and even made its way into a governor's speech during a statewide session on law enforcement transparency. The story was no longer just about someone getting doused with cold water. It became a symbol of what it means to lead with courage and to commit to deep-rooted change instead of surface-level fixes. Halvorson didn't turn into an angel overnight. In therapy sessions, he was still rough around the edges, still battled his instinct to get defensive, but he no longer shouted when challenged. He started listening, something no one had ever taught him. In over 2 decades of service, Danica never expected Halvorson to become a role model, but she believed this. If a system only knows how to cut out the bad, without offering a path to repair, then that system isn't healing. It's just slicing into its own living tissue. And then, one day, in a newly launched internal training session, Danica told the story from the very beginning, not as a leader, but as the woman in the gray t-shirt who walked into Eastvale that day. She didn't mention rank. She didn't talk about power. She just asked, if tomorrow, someone like Tanya Brooks walked into your precinct, what would you do differently? The room went still. But this time, the silence wasn't heavy. It was the kind of silence that comes from reflection, a rare thing in law enforcement, where reaction often outruns introspection. This story, in the end, was never meant to condemn. It was meant to illuminate, to shine inward, into the heart of every officer, every public servant, and ask, why do I serve? And do I have the courage to change when the wrong I see is wearing the same uniform as me? If the answer is yes, then change is no longer theory. It's already begun, with one wet cap, with one look that didn't turn away. Thank you for spending time with this story today. Sometimes it's not the biggest acts, but how we react to injustice that force a whole system to take a hard look at itself. If this story stirred something in you, please share it. Someone out there might need to hear it too. And if you'd like to follow more true, powerful, quietly moving stories, tap that follow button. I've handpicked 2 stories just below, each carrying a different shade of justice and the human spirit. See you in the next video.